Hello, everyone. We will continue our study in the book of Esther. If you are just starting out, make sure you do chapter 1. Listen to chapter 1. It is a picture of a throne chair. That would be chapter 1. This one is chapter 2, and it's pictures of pillows. So I tried to record this using my own self, visually as I teach this lesson, but I just couldn't handle that. So we'll just use little pictures until I get a little more comfortable. So we learned in chapter 1 that King Ahasuerus had a party, a banquet, a feast, and he gets drunk. And a lot of times when men become drunk, I'm not picking on men, I'm just telling the story, they like to talk about women. And apparently that's what happened, because King Ahasuerus decided that he wanted Vashti, his wife, to come down and parade around in front of all the men with her crown on. It's believed that she was to be naked, and even if that wasn't true, it still was not a good idea to have the queen parade around in front of a bunch of men. So she refused to do it, and because she did, King Ahasuerus talked to his lawyers, and they sent out a letter saying that they're going to find a new queen because Vashti is going to be trouble for all the rest of the women. So now in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, after these things, well, that's what the after these things are, those things I just told you. When the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he had wrath for what Vashti did. By refusing him. He wasn't just angry or mad. He had wrath. And there is a big difference. I don't know if you've ever seen someone with wrath in their body. It is a scary thing. Not just angry or mad, but wrath. But it says after his wrath has subsided, in other words, he wasn't angry anymore, and he wasn't drunk anymore. He remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. It kind of makes you think he might have been thinking about, oh, my Vashti, I wished I hadn't have done that to her. I acted in haste. I was drunk and I have an anger issue. But nevertheless, he remembers her in this particular chapter, and that's how we start out. And then in verse 4 he says, then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So it suggested to the king that young virgins be brought in so that he could look at them and pick a new queen for himself, sort of like a beauty contest. This is the only beauty contest in the Bible, and the young virgins would also get beauty treatments while they're in the palace, and historians say there were about 400 young women in this contest. Now, this pleases the king. I mean, good grief, 400 young women, virgins, so that he can check them out and see if he likes any of them to be his new queen. Sorry, my little picture is moving. Oh, well. Let me see if I can fix that. All right. So the king was to be the only judge of this contest, and it helps us see just how long it took him to get over Queen Vashti. Now, how would this type of arrangement make you feel? To think of a king taking 400 young virgin girls in and seeing if he can pick a queen among them. It kind of makes me think the king is spoiled, and there's really no heart in his chest. He's looking for eye and sexual pleasure in a new queen, and that's it. Now, Queen Vashti must have been a fine woman to stand up against the king the way that she did. And she's tossed away as if she was nothing. So in verse 5, chapter 2, it says, in Shushan the citadel, remember that's a place, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, Mordecai, I have little riddles. I think I told you that. Mordecai was mortified, as we'll find out later on. Now, he's raising this young girl named Esther. Her Jewish name is Hadassah. Now, she is Jewish. He is her cousin. He is not her uncle, and he is raising her. He worked in the king's palace. And the reason he's there, it has to do with the fact of war. I won't go into all of that. His great-grandfather Kish had been captured when Jerusalem was destroyed, and they all ended up in that area. Now, Kish was King Saul's dad, and there's a whole study there, which hopefully we will get to one day, and we'll study about King Saul. And it'll make, the more you study God's Word, book by book, the more you understand. I'm not going to teach you theology, and I'm not going to teach you about a relationship with Jesus Christ, but I'm going to teach you God's book, God's Word, and that's what He's put on me to do. So that's where we're at, and that's what we're going to do. The book was written for us and to us. So shame on us if we don't learn it. Shame on us if we don't understand it. You know, we should be able to open any book of the Bible and know what that book is about. You can tell I don't know how to work gadgets, as this one keeps sliding around. So in Esther chapter 2, verse 7, and Mordecai, remember he's Esther's cousin, brought up Hadassah. That's Esther's Jewish name. That is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his very own daughter. Now, how do you feel about a man who would do this? He must have just been a great guy. He was very special. He was very unselfish. He must have had a heart of gold to do this. And of course, all of this is by God's design. Esther was beautiful. She was Jewish. She was orphaned. She was raised by her older male cousin. Even though times were hard for her, we learn in this study how God can use us wherever He places us. We will see that Esther's position was a platform for ministry, and that became a place of deliverance for her people. And so in verse 8, and so it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, remember the decree was sent out about Vashti, and when many young women were gathered at the Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken up to the king's palace and to the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now let's think about these girls. They must have been put in chariots. There must have been men that went out into all the places, the villages, and gathered up these girls who were virgins. Some of the parents, as history teaches us, they were willing to let their daughters go because if she had a chance to become the queen, it meant wealth and it meant a lot of good things for them if their daughter became the queen. But a lot of these girls and these families did not want to go, I'm sure. I'm sure they cried. They didn't want to be put on this chariot wagon and hauled up to the Shushan, the citadel, to see if the king liked her. So Esther pleased King Ahasuerus' eunuch. Therefore, he liked her very much. She did not have to worry about him or any other eunuch sexually. They were not interested. So she must have had a pleasing personality, which reminds us that looks aren't everything. And the reason I even brought that up was because the eunuch just liked her. And it says in verse 9, now the young women pleased him, and she obtained his favor, talking about the eunuch. So he readily gave her beauty preparations, besides what she was allowed to have. So she got above. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her. Now this is a young girl. She's probably in her tweens. She's not even up in her teenage years yet. And she has 7 maidservants provided for her. And he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. She got the best place. She got maidservants. She got extra with beauty treatments. And again, I talk a lot about history because I study it. But the girls, a lot of times their diet consisted of certain kinds of foods that came out of their pores, let's just say, if it was garlic or some kind of curry or something like that. And it had a different kind of smell. Well, the king wanted them to be in pools of baths for 6 months for their skin, probably to get different odors out. And he wanted them to eat a certain type of diet so that they would smell like he wanted them to smell. But Esther must have felt like a queen. Her wait in the harem was 12 months. They did all of this preparation for the women for 12 months to prepare them to go into the king. I'm sure she must have appreciated the royal treatment by the king's eunuch. She was a young girl, probably around 12 or 13 years old at this time. And it wasn't luck that the king's eunuchs showed Esther favor. It was God's design. There's no luck with God. God is not a God of luck. So in verse 10, Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. So what that means is Mordecai just tells her, for now, don't tell anyone you're a Jew. You're just like the other girls around here. You're not a Jew. You're just use your Persian name and just blend in with everyone else. He thought that was the best way to proceed for the time being. He didn't even want her to tell his maids. And for a young girl, you know, when you're sitting around at night talking or during the day, that must have been a difficult thing for her to not say, being so young. But she didn't. She kept it to herself. And it says, every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So again, through study, it's believed that Mordecai was a eunuch, or he would not have been allowed to pace in front of the court of the women's quarters. But he did. And why do you think he did that? Obviously, he did that because he cared so much about Esther and he wanted to know what was going on with her. And it says he did it every day for 1 year. He checked on her. So in verse 12, it says, each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she completed 12 months' preparations according to the regulation for the women. For this were the days of their preparation appointed, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Can you imagine? 12 months of getting their little bodies ready. Mordecai was very attentive to Esther's welfare. He cared a great deal about her, but she was now in a secluded harem, in a place where he could not go very easily, but he was able to go far enough where he could check on her. He was pretty apprehensive at this point, wondering probably if he had done the right thing by her. And we got to remember, the girls who did not win this contest would automatically enter the harem of the king and become a concubine, including Esther if she did not win. So all 400 of these girls, that was it for them. They belonged to the king. And a concubine is a woman that cohabitates with a man by law. She's inferior socially or legally as like a second wife. It's kind of the same thing. And a harem is a household of women, a whole bunch, like a concubine, women who mate and lodge with one man. So in verse 12 it says, each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she completed her preparations. What does it mean that each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus? Remember, there's approximately 400 girls. Each girl took a turn going into King Ahasuerus' bedroom. They were prepared. They were prepared to have sexual relations with this king only after they spent a year getting their bodies ready. And, you know, y'all, I don't want you to think bad of me. I had a mother one time say that I was too graphic when I taught. But this is not a fairy tale. This is the Bible. And graphic or not, I'm not trying to be graphic. I'm just telling you what Scripture says. I mean, it kind of makes me sick to read this, but this is what they did. And back in the day, too, you have to remember, these girls married at a young age, regardless of this contest, even though this contest is, you know, not something we agree with, probably, but it wasn't as odd as it would be for us. But the most beautiful virgins were selected to be a part of this harem. History says they're brought in from all levels of life, from the poor to the wealthy. Some of the girls came from poor families who were forced to eat rather poorly most of their lives. Therefore, like I said before, their digestive system brought on certain kinds of body odor, especially when they would perspire. So he wanted to get them ready for him. So women haven't changed that much. We still do a lot to get ready. So in verse 13 it says, thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the king's quarters to the king's palace. So in other words, when it became her turn, she was able to go to the closet like I did when I went to the Martin's house. She was able to go to the closet and pick out whatever she wanted to wear to go into the king. Whatever she wanted to wear, however she wanted to fix her hair, using the kind of perfume she wanted to use, she was able to fix herself up to go into him. Any kind of accessory, jewelry, makeup, all of that. So in verse 14, in the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women. So I'm sorry, but in the evening she went in at night to King Ahasuerus' bed. She didn't come out until the morning. And remember, these girls were virgins. And if she was not selected, she was returned to the second house of the women in the custody of Shaashgaz. That's another eunuch who kept the concubines. So it was just like an assembly line. They would go in, the Bible says this, it's not a fairy tale. They would go in the evening, and in the morning, he let them go, and he would say, take them, put them, they're a concubine now. That's their fate. They're a concubine. She would not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. So he could call for her, if her name was Elizabeth or Frances or whatever, he could call for that girl again. But other than that, she was just sent to the quarters with the concubines. She went in the evening. She came out in the morning. I wonder how much of their little lives were taken from them. They didn't get to live where they wanted to live. But of course, some of them were better off because they did get to just live in the quarters of the king. They were young. They didn't get to do the things young people did. They missed out on a first kiss of love. They missed out on freedom, being with their family, going to school, getting married with the man that they love, and having children. This was pretty tough. I would have to say it would be really tough for me to be taken away from my family and live like this. So in verse 15 it says, now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Now what this is telling us is Esther was a very smart girl. And so I told you before that the girls were allowed to take what they wanted to take in with the king, or dress like they wanted to dress, wear the kind of heels or whatever it was they wore, slippers, jewelry, do their hair up. But she said, hey, I want this eunuch to dress me, fix me up. He knows what the king likes, so fix me up. And so he did. And it says, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So anyone that was there thought, wow, she's beautiful. So Esther made a decision. She was very wise and mature for her age. In verse 16 it says, so Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus. Someone took her there to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth of the 7th year of his reign. So 1 year had gone by, at least. So she's probably around 14, somewhere maybe between 14 and 16 years old now. Time is going by. Because they don't have FedEx and all that. They don't have trains and planes and automobiles. All this took time to get these girls together and get all this taken care of. So it's time for her to go into the king. And so she did. And in verse 17 it says, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So this girl went into him, and the way she became the queen was he put a crown on her head. Then the king made a feast, the feast of Esther, for all of his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So she got a day of celebration. He threw a great feast, a feast of Esther, because she had pleased him so much. And then in verse 19 it said, when the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Mordecai worked at the king's gate, and it says when the virgins were gathered a second time. What that means is, let's just say Esther, there was 400 women, and Esther was woman number 168. I don't know what she was, But he gathered the rest a second time, and he finished his process of being with these girls. Now Esther had not revealed to her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her to do. In other words, she did not tell them that she was a Jew. She obeyed Mordecai when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Teresh and Bigthan, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Now what happened was, Esther's the queen, Mordecai works at the gate, and these two eunuchs come by, and they're just talking about killing the king. They haven't touched the king, they haven't shot at the king, they haven't, sent bombs to the palace, they haven't done anything. Verse 21 tells us that the trouble arrives while Mordecai was sitting at the gate of his job. One day he heard two of the king's eunuchs plotting to kill the king. We don't know why. They were just doorkeepers. My only guess is that maybe the eunuchs were angry with the king Ahasuerus for dethroning Queen Vashti and choosing Esther instead, but they were mad. The eunuchs get they fall in love with whoever they take care of in a good way. They care a lot about them. So these eunuchs could have been two eunuchs that really loved Vashti, and they might have been mad that the king had done this. So they were just speaking bad about him and talking about doing something to them. And Mordecai heard them. So the matter became known to Mordecai because he heard them, and he tells Queen Esther. And Esther informs the king in Mordecai's name what had happened. She makes sure that the king knows that these two eunuchs were talking about. So it says, and when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on the gallows. And thus it is written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Now these two eunuchs did nothing but talk about killing the king, and they were hung in the gallows. Now back then, the hangings, again, if I'm too graphic, I'm sorry. Just don't listen to me. But back then, this hanging was impalement. And what they did was they would select these long, sharp poles, and they would impale people on these poles, and they would leave them there to show others not to do what they did. And it was a very terrible way to die. I may go into more detail about that later on. It says that it was confirmed that they talked about killing the king, and so they're impaled. They're killed. And it's written in the book of Chronicles. What that means, it's kind of like it's kind of like a book that tells you, like a diary, tells you what went on. And so the king has these chronicles, and everything's put in there. So Mordecai hears, they're killed, and it's written down in the Chronicles. The secretary took minutes of this incident, and it was kept to the book of the king's Chronicles. I don't feel so good because these two eunuchs just... They died for talking about killing the king. Okay, hope I didn't go too fast. Hope you enjoyed the study, and we will do chapter 3 next.